Welcome back to Lily of the Valley Coaching. This is your host, Bernadette, and I want to talk today to you about the taxonomy of pivots. Respected minds, I invite you to consider a recurring phenomenon in cultural history, one that transcends geography, era, and discipline. It is the strategic reorientation of public identity, the pivot, from one form of capital to another when the first no longer yields the desired influence. This is not conjecture. It is observable, documentable, and verifiable. And, as with all patterns, once you see it, you cannot unsee it. We'll first begin today with defining the pivot. A pivot, in this context, is not mere personal growth. It is a deliberate recalibration of brand, narrative, and perceived authority. The most visible form is the intellectual to mystic pivot, the movement from scholarly or artistic rigor into the realm of esoterica, where claims are less easily challenged and charisma can outrun evidence. But there are other species of pivot equally revealing. Let's talk about the taxonomy. First kind is the intellectual to mystic. Here we find figures such as Helena Blavatsky, who moved from comparative religion writing to founding the Theosophical Society. Then you have Aleister Crowley, a Cambridge-educated poet and mountaineer who recast himself as an occult figurehead and self-styled magus. And then there's John Dee, mathematician and royal advisor who turned to angelic communication and alchemy when his scientific career waned. Then you have the more modern version of this, the more digital version of this, which I call aesthetic capital to the mystic. This is the pivot from beauty-based or glamour-based branding to the language of wisdom and spiritual authority. It is often deployed to reframe aging, to shift audience perception, or to claim a gravitas that aesthetic capital alone cannot sustain. The mechanics are identical to the intellectual pivot. Only the currency changes. Where is the discrepancy? We'll talk about the brand discrepancy. Here, the inconsistency becomes instructive. One cannot strip a name, a biography, and a public narrative of all references to beauty or sexual aesthetics, and yet leave intact the visual archive that trades on precisely those qualities. That is not transformation. It is a costume change. If the imagery remains, the brand remains. The caption has shifted, but the currency is the same. A genuine rebrand is holistic. It alters not only the language, but the underlying value proposition. To retain the same body-forward imagery while claiming a departure from aesthetic capital is to ask the audience, to suspend not only disbelief, but memory. And seasoned audiences, particularly those in the, let's say, 45 to 65 demographic, do not suffer amnesia on command. So let's talk about the exception to the rule. We've covered the two major types, of pivot, then you have the exception to the rule. Sometimes these pivots are divinely guided and not just a knee-jerk rebrand for survival. It is important to note that not all pivots into mysticism are evasions. Some are, in fact, assignments. One example is Emanuel Swedenborg, who stands as an exception, a scientist and philosopher whose visions led him into Christian mysticism. His shift appears less about escaping scrutiny and more about delivering what he believed was a divinely orchestrated revelation. The distinction between a costume and a crown is motive. So, esteemed minds, I leave you with this to close. When we encounter the pivot, we must ask ourselves, is this a coronation or a costume change? Is the new identity a calling, or is it a refuge from the rigor of accountability and scrutiny? History will answer if we are willing to look. And once you have the map, you will see the terrain for what it truly is. My friends, esteemed minds, I hope I have given you something to think on. And if you have any questions, if you have any comments, the comment section is open. We can share our ideas and our thoughts about this. Until next time, from one esteemed mind to another, lots of respect, and I will see you at the finish line. This has been your host, Bernadette, with Lily of the Valley Coaching. I will see you in the next episode. Please follow for more.